Have you ever made a decision you regretted for a lifetime? Cassian had it all: intelligence, power, and a billion-dollar space tech empire. But 10 years ago he chose his career, forcing his girlfriend to give up their unborn child. He thought it was the right decision, until the truth came crashing down. At a hospital, Cassian unexpectedly crosses paths with Sarah, the woman he once loved. But what truly stuns him is the 9-year-old girl standing beside her. A girl with bright, starry eyes, filled with a passion for space, just like him. Can Cassian right his wrongs? Will the child accept the father who once abandoned her mother? And can Sarah ever forgive him? Don't turn away. The truth is more painful than you think. Global Space Tech Conference. Houston, Texas. Cassian Ward stood at the center of the grand conference stage, bathed in the brilliance of overhead lights streaming down from the modern glass ceiling. Behind him, a massive LED screen displayed a breathtaking simulation. A spacecraft soaring over the rugged surface of Mars, its metallic hull catching the sunlight like a lone jewel in the vast cosmos. We stand on the brink of history. Cassian's voice was deep, steady, reverberating through the state-of-the-art sound system. His sharp gaze swept across the audience. Hundreds of the greatest minds in aerospace, powerful investors, and the ever-watchful media. He gestured toward the screen, where the Asterix Orion spacecraft dominated the display, the vessel carrying humanity's ambition to Mars. Over a century ago, we could only dream of setting foot on the moon. In 1969, we made that dream a reality, but we cannot stop there. Now, in 2034, Asterix has pioneered an unprecedented breakthrough, a quantum propulsion system capable of reaching Mars in just 60 days. The screen transitioned to a slow-rotating 3D model, showcasing the Orion as it defied Earth's gravity, piercing through space at an unmatched velocity. The room fell into a hushed silence. Cassian paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He had grown accustomed to these moments. The anticipation, the gleam of conquest in the eyes of dreamers, the murmurs of scientists rapidly calculating feasibility. His voice grew even more resolute. But our ambition doesn't end with getting there. We intend to live there, to build a new world, a future where our children can look up at the night sky and know that beyond this planet there is a home waiting for humanity. A smattering of applause rippled through the crowd, gradually swelling into a thunderous ovation. Cassian smiled, but in the depths of his eyes, something flickered, an emptiness no one else noticed. He continued, laying out the experimental phases, the launch timeline, and the immense commercial potential of the project. Investors nodded in approval. Journalists scribbled furiously, and the atmosphere crackled with energy. Seated in the front row, Genevieve Langley, a sharp-witted business magnate and Asterix's largest shareholder, leaned back in her chair, watching Cassian with calculating interest. As his speech concluded, Cassian gave a brief nod before stepping off stage to a standing ovation. He strode toward the wings, where his personal assistant, Mark, was already waiting. "Cass, you killed it. Investors are all in," Mark said, handing him a bottle of water. Cassian took it, twisting the cap off. "Interest is good, but I need commitments. I'm not here for applause." Mark nodded. "We've got a board meeting in 30 minutes. Also, a few reporters want interviews now." Cassian exhaled, adjusting his collar. "What do they want to know?" "Mostly about Orion's success rate. And your personal life." Cassian's fingers froze for a fraction of a second before he resumed as if unaffected. "We knew that question was coming." Mark shrugged. "You know how they are. They love the image of the lone genius, someone willing to sacrifice everything for a dream." Cassian gave a faint smirk. "Isn't that the truth?" Mark didn't answer, only handed him a tablet with a list of media questions. Cassian skimmed through them quickly, until his gaze landed on one particular line. "There are rumors that you abandoned a family for your career. Any comment?" His grip on the tablet tightened. "Cut that question," he said, his voice lowering. Mark hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Understood." Cassian exhaled, squared his shoulders, and stepped out into the press room, where cameras and microphones were already waiting. He had stood, on countless stages, commanded the future with the sheer force of his vision. He held the technology to change the course of human history. And yet, there was one thing Cassian had never been able to reach: a past that refused to stay buried. Space Education Center, Houston, Texas. The rhythmic shuffle of footsteps echoed across the gleaming metal floor as a group of students in navy blue uniforms entered through the automated doors. They belonged to NASA's Young Talent program, their eyes wide with wonder as they took in the suspended spacecraft models, holographic galaxies swirling above them, and the intricate simulators waiting to be explored. Amidst the excited chatter, 10-year-old Lyra Morgan stood unusually still. Her dark brown hair was neatly tied back, but it was her bright, starry eyes that truly stood out, locked onto the slow-spinning model of the Orion spacecraft inside a vacuum chamber. Their instructor, Mr. Powell, a middle-aged man with a strict demeanor, clapped his hands to regain their focus. "Today, we have the chance to learn about the technology that will take humans to Mars. But first, remember, safety is key. No touching. Any equipment without permission, understood?" A chorus of voices responded, "Yes, sir." Lyra, however, barely reacted. Her gaze had shifted to a large screen playing a pre-recorded speech. On screen, Cassian Ward was speaking about humanity's future in space, his deep, resonant voice filling the room. "We are not just seeking a new world. We are building the future of our species." Lyra squinted slightly. There was something oddly familiar about that voice. She had never met this man before. Yet deep inside, an unexplainable connection stirred. "Lyra, aren't you coming to see the spacecraft models?" A voice pulled her back to reality. It was Mia, her best friend. "Yeah, I'm coming." Lyra quickly followed Mia to the low-gravity simulation area, where a virtual reality chamber allowed students to experience what it felt like to walk on Mars. Mia eagerly stepped onto the platform, sliding on the VR goggles. Within seconds, she let out an excited laugh as her avatar began to float. "Oh my gosh, it's like I'm flying." Lyra watched, but her mind was elsewhere. Cassian's words still echoed in her thoughts. Almost unconsciously, her feet moved in, another direction, toward the Astra X engine testing zone, where a scaled-down model of the quantum propulsion system hummed softly inside a sealed vacuum chamber. This area wasn't meant for students, but by pure chance, a metal door had been left slightly open as a technician exited. Lyra hesitated. She wasn't the type to break the rules. But the machine, it was calling to her. She stepped inside. The lab was bathed in cold, artificial light from rows of control panels. Directly ahead, a prototype quantum engine pulsed with a soft blue glow, tiny plasma streams flickering from its core. Lyra stepped closer. Her gaze drifted to a touchscreen monitor beside the engine. It displayed a detailed schematic, filled with complex equations and engineering data. and strangely, she understood it. Ion exhaust velocity, vacuum pressure levels, propulsion efficiency. Her fingers instinctively swiped through the data, absorbing the information as if it had been imprinted in her mind long ago. Then her eyes landed on a small section at the bottom of the screen. Designed by Cassian Ward. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. Before she could process the weight of that name, a loud alarm blared through the facility. Red warning lights flashed. She spun around. A technician had spotted her. "Hey, you're not allowed in here." Lyra instinctively stepped back. Crack. Her foot slipped, right at the edge of an open test chamber. In an instant, gravity betrayed her. She fell, and at that exact moment, a sudden power surge pulsed through the prototype engine. The test chamber's automatic doors slammed shut, locking Lyra inside. Mia had just finished her VR session when the alarms went off. She spun around, eyes scanning the room in panic. "Lyra, where are you?" Students murmured in confusion. Security personnel rushed toward the restricted area. A scientist shouted in alarm. "A child is trapped inside the reaction chamber. The emergency locks have been triggered." Mia's breath caught in her throat as she spotted Lyra through the thick glass of the chamber. Her best friend stood frozen inside, wide-eyed and terrified. She was trapped inside a quantum propulsion test unit. Inside the chamber, Lyra felt the air shift. A strange sensation crawled over her skin, like tiny electric currents whispering through her veins. Outside, a lead technician's voice rang out. If we don't override the system now, the engine will initiate test mode in 10 seconds. The research center erupted into chaos. Memorial Hermann Hospital, Houston, Texas. Sierra Morgan burst through the sliding doors of the ER, clutching her daughter tightly against her chest. Lyra's forehead was no longer bleeding, but her pale face and labored breathing made Sarah's heart seize with fear. "Doctor, please, help my daughter," she cried out, her voice sharp with desperation. A nurse rushed over with a stretcher as two doctors in white coats sprinted toward them. One of them recognized Sarah immediately. "Dr. Morgan, what happened?" Head. Trauma. She was trapped inside a testing chamber. Possible exposure to a strong electromagnetic pulse. Her words came in a panic, but her hands remained steady as she checked Lyra's pulse while the medical team carefully transferred her onto the stretcher. Oxygen saturation at 96%. Pulse slightly elevated, a nurse reported as they wheeled Lyra into Trauma Room 3. Sarah never took her eyes off her daughter, not even for a second. But right now, she wasn't Dr. Sarah Morgan, the seasoned physician. She was just a mother, terrified of the worst. A young doctor, Dr. Patel, approached her cautiously. "Dr. Morgan, I know you want to stay, but we need to run neurological tests and a CT scan immediately." Sarah clenched her fists. "I want to go with her." Dr. Patel hesitated before nodding. "All right, but let us do our job." Sarah gave a firm nod, blinking away the burning tears threatening to fall. She had to stay strong. X. Headquarters. Cassian Ward's phone buzzed in his pocket. He was still standing before a crowd of reporters, fielding an avalanche of questions after the conference, when his assistant, Mark, suddenly pushed through the chaos, his face pale with urgency. Cassian immediately knew something was wrong. "Sir, there's been an accident at the Space Education Center." Cassian's expression darkened. "What happened?" "A child got trapped inside the quantum propulsion test chamber." Cassian's heart skipped a beat. "Which child?" Mark hesitated. Then, carefully, he spoke. "Her name is Lyra Morgan." The name hit Cassian like a blade. Morgan. A strange unease rippled through him, a feeling he couldn't quite explain. "Is she all right?" His voice dropped an octave. "She was taken to Memorial Hermann Hospital. Do you want us to—" Cassian didn't let him finish. He turned sharply, striding toward the parking lot. "Get the car, now." Mark hurried after him. "But Cass, the press—" "I don't care." Cassian had never felt like this before. An overwhelming urgency. A gnawing fear. He didn't even know why. Or rather, a part of him already did. Memorial Hermann Hospital. Cassian pushed through the hospital doors, moving quickly through the sterile hallways. And then he saw her, Sarah Morgan. She was standing by a row of monitors, still dressed in her white coat, eyes rimmed with exhaustion but burning with fierce determination as she studied her daughter's CT scan. Cassian froze. 10 years. 10 years since he had last seen her. 10 years since he had made the worst mistake of his life, choosing his career over the woman he loved. And now, there she was. Sarah turned. Her body went rigid. Their eyes collided, and for a single excruciating second, time stopped. Then Sarah's gaze hardened. "Cassian!" Her voice was ice. Something twisted deep in Cassian's chest. "Sarah," he murmured. But before he could say another word, his gaze shifted. To the CT scan on the monitor, to the patient's name printed on the screen. Lyra Morgan. Age 10, the world around him blurred. A sharp ringing filled his ears. His mind raced, snapping pieces of the puzzle into place. The child in the testing chamber, the dark brown hair, the brilliant eyes, the last name, Morgan. Cassian's entire reality fractured in an instant. He had a daughter, and he never even knew. His breath stalled in his lungs, an invisible force squeezing his ribs. But before he could process it, before he could speak, Sarah stepped forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "You don't belong here." "You don't belong here." Sarah's voice was ice, her eyes sharp as steel, staring at Cassian as if he were nothing more than a stranger, a trespasser in a place he had no right to be. Cassian couldn't speak. The words caught in his throat. As he stared at the CT scan, Lyra Morgan's name burning into his mind. Sarah didn't wait. She turned, stepping quickly into the hospital room where Lyra lay resting. The door shut in Cassian's face. He stood there, frozen, as the ground beneath him seemed to give way. Mark approached but said nothing. He knew Cassian needed a moment, to breathe, to process the fact that he had just lost 10 years of his life without knowing. But Cassian Ward was not a man who gave up easily. Drawing in a slow, measured breath, he made a decision. He was staying, needed answers. Hospital garden. Sunset, the late afternoon sun bathed the small hospital garden in a golden hue. Cassian walked along the stone path, his thoughts spiraling. How much had he missed? He had once believed that he couldn't have both, a career and a family. But now, standing here, looking back, what had he really gained? As he wrestled with his thoughts, a soft voice drifted through the air. "Earth isn't just blue." Cassian stilled. Turning his head, he saw a young girl sitting on a stone bench, a sketchbook open across her lap. Lyra. His chest tightened. He wanted to step closer, but he hesitated. She was drawing, her pencil moving carefully across the page, shading a planet unlike any in the solar system. Swirling atmospheric layers, jagged landforms, a sky streaked with deep violet hues. She wasn't drawing Mars. She wasn't drawing Venus. She was creating a world of her own. Cassian studied the sketch for a long moment before finally speaking. "Those purple clouds. What do you think they're made of?" Lyra startled slightly, looking up at him. She had Sarah's eyes, but there was something else, something unmistakably familiar, though Cassian couldn't place it. "Who are you?" Lyra asked, not fearful, just curious. Cassian gave a small smile, sitting on the opposite end of the bench. "Just someone who loves space." He tilted his head toward her drawing. "Your planet looks fascinating." Lyra studied him as if weighing whether he was worth talking to. Then she returned to her sketch and countered, "What do you think the clouds are made of?" Cassian glanced at the intricate shading, the thoughtful placement of atmospheric layers. This wasn't a child's random doodling. It was intentional. Without hesitation, he answered, "A mix of hydrogen sulfide and water vapor. If this planet orbits an M-type star, the heat could create the exact violet-hued clouds you've drawn." Lyra's eyes lit up. "Not many people know that." Her voice held a note of surprise. Cassian chuckled lightly. "I've spent most of my life studying space. The universe is my whole world." Lyra nodded thoughtfully, flipping to a new page. For a while, she sketched in silence before asking, "Do you believe in a one-way trip to Mars?" Cassian blinked. "What do you mean?" Lyra looked up, her gaze far deeper than a child's should be. "Some people are willing to leave Earth forever because they believe they'll find something bigger than themselves." A chill ran down Cassian's spine. Once he had believed that. Once he had chosen a path with no return. When he walked away from Sarah, he had thought that was the price of ambition. And now, sitting here with this strange, brilliant girl, he realized he had never considered what he had lost. Cassian didn't know she was his daughter, but somehow, in some undeniable way, he felt connected to her, like a force he couldn't explain. Inside the hospital, Sarah stood behind the glass doors, watching them. Her heart pounded. Cassian didn't know. He didn't know that Lyra was his child, and yet they were talking as if they had known each other forever. For 10 years, Sarah had kept the past buried. She had done everything to protect Lyra, to make sure her daughter never had to know about the man who had walked away before she was even born. But now, Cassian had found her, without anyone saying a word. A lump formed in Sarah's throat. How much longer could she keep the truth hidden? The garden bench. Sunset Cassian sat motionless on the stone bench, watching Lyra's pencil move across the paper with quiet precision. She wasn't nervous around him. That was strange. Cassian was used to people looking at him with admiration, hesitation, or outright intimidation. But Lyra wasn't like them. She was at ease, even challenging in a way. "Do you draw too?" Lyra asked without looking up. Cassian smiled faintly. "I sketch technical schematics more than pictures." "So you don't have imagination?" Cassian raised an eyebrow, momentarily caught off guard. "Schematics require imagination too, you know." Lyra didn't reply right away. She remained focused, her brows slightly furrowed in concentration. Cassian found himself drawn in by the way she worked. This wasn't like a child's usual sketch. Messy, unbalanced, playful. Lyra's strokes were intentional, exact. Cassian tilted his head, studying the page more closely. She was drawing a spacecraft. His gaze narrowed. There was something eerily familiar about it. Every contour, every aerodynamic curve, the engine placement, the navigation system. Cassian's stomach tightened. He knew this design because he was the one who had drawn it. Years ago, at Astrax, he had conceptualized a prototype spacecraft. It had never been made public, never even progressed beyond internal research. His fingers pressed into his knee as a chill ran through him. "Where did you get this design?" Cassian asked, keeping his voice even. Lyra didn't look up. "I thought of it." "You thought of it?" She nodded. "I was wondering how we could reach Mars faster, and I realized the engine should go here." She pointed to a small but critical adjustment in the design. Cassian's breath caught in his throat. Because that exact placement, that one modification, had been a hotly debated issue among his engineers 3 years ago, and Lyra had just figured it out on her own. Cassian felt something shift inside him. For the first time since meeting her, he wasn't just intrigued. He was deeply unsettled. Who was this child? A soft footstep broke the moment. Cassian turned, and his eyes locked onto Sarah's. She had been standing there, silent, watching. Her gaze flickered to Lyra's drawing, and for the briefest second, she froze. Cassian caught the moment of hesitation. Lyra looked up and saw her mother. Her fingers instantly snapped the sketchbook shut. "Are you feeling better?" Sarah asked, her voice calm, but Cassian detected the underlying tension. Lyra nodded. "I'm fine." Sarah sat down beside her daughter, her posture carefully composed. "What were you drawing?" she asked, her tone light. Lyra hesitated. Then she lied. "Nothing, Mom." Cassian noticed the shift immediately. Lyra had been open with him, speaking freely. But the second Sarah appeared, she shut down. He looked at Sarah. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Her face remained unreadable. "Knew about what?" Cassian exhaled sharply, tilting his chin toward the sketchbook. "Your daughter just designed a spacecraft with near-perfect engineering accuracy, a design that has never been made public. Do you really think that's just coincidence?" Sarah met his gaze head-on. Children have vivid imaginations. Too quick, too rehearsed. Cassian's jaw tightened. She was hiding something. Lyra glanced between them, sensing the shift in the air. She didn't understand why the conversation had changed so suddenly. But deep down, she could feel it. There was a secret between them, one that she wasn't supposed to know. The weight of truth. The air between them grew thick, heavy with something unspoken yet undeniable. Lyra might have been young, but even she could feel the invisible tension between her mother and the man who, until seconds ago, was a stranger. Cassian said nothing, but the weight of suspicion pressed into his chest like a tightening vice. He looked at Lyra, her small hands clenched around her sketchbook as if guarding something precious. Then he looked at Sarah, and what he saw wasn't indifference. It was control. Control over a secret she never intended for him to uncover. Cassian inhaled slowly, steadying himself, but his instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. Then, Lyra shifted slightly, and a faint smudge of graphite trailed across the back of her hand. Cassian barely noticed it at first, but then, his gaze caught on something just above her wrist. A birthmark, a cluster of tiny freckles arranged in a shape he knew by heart. Cassian's breath hitched. No, it couldn't be. Orion, a star map imprinted on her skin, a mark identical to the one on his own wrist, the same rare genetic trait his mother had once called the mark of the stars. His entire body locked up. Cassian stared at Lyra, at her eyes, her expressions, her intelligence far beyond her years. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't deny it anymore. Cassian Ward had a daughter, and he had never known. The realization hit like an earthquake, shattering the foundation of everything he believed to be true. 10 years. 10 years. Sarah had kept this from him. His hands clenched on the bench. His mind was spiraling, grasping at memories, at choices, at all the ways he had been so blind. He turned to Sarah, his voice hoarse, raw with emotion. "Sarah." She stiffened. "You knew." Cassian's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a lifetime's worth of betrayal. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Sarah's jaw tightened. She had wanted to control this moment. She had never wanted him to find out like this. But now, it was too late. She stood abruptly, her eyes flashing with fury. "You don't get to ask me that." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the fragile air between them. Cassian rose too, his hands fisting at his sides as he fought to contain the storm inside him. "I don't have the right?" His voice dropped lower, trembling with anger and grief. "Sarah, you kept this from me for 10 years. 10 years!" Sarah's chest rose and fell, her breath uneven, but she refused to back down. "And what, Cassian?" Her voice wavered, not with weakness but with rage and heartbreak. "Do you think you deserved to know?" Her words struck deep, cutting past his fury and straight into his guilt. "You were the one who told me we couldn't have a child," she spat, her voice cracking. "That if I kept her, I'd be holding you back from your dream." Cassian's entire world collapsed in on itself. The past came roaring back. The night in Boston. The fight in their tiny apartment, Sarah crying, pleading, and him walking away. "You didn't choose me, Cassian." Her voice broke. "So why the hell do you think you get to choose Lyra now?" Lyra stood frozen, her small body rigid with shock. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're my father?" Cassian turned to her, his heart shattered at the look in her eyes. Pain, confusion, a wound he had unknowingly caused? "Yes." His voice was rough, unsteady. His throat closed. "I didn't know, Lyra. I swear to you I didn't know." Lyra took a step back. Her whole life, it had just been her and Mom. And now, suddenly, this powerful, brilliant stranger, this man she had unknowingly inherited her love for the stars from, was her father. It was too much. Lyra's voice cracked. I don't know. Then, she turned and ran. "Lyra!" Sarah called out, but the girl disappeared into the hospital corridors. Sarah whipped around, her rage now a raging inferno. "You ruined everything." Cassian felt like he had been punched in the gut. "Sarah, please, no." She advanced toward him, her voice deadly quiet. "You want the truth? Fine. Here it is." Her words shook. "You abandoned her before she was even born, and I will not let you do it again." Cassian's chest caved inward. Sarah gave him one last scathing look, then turned and ran after their daughter. Cassian stood there, alone, under the fading light of sunset. A man who once had everything, a man who had lost it all, and now he had just found the most important thing in his life, only to realize He had already lost her. The weight of a choice Sarah rushed down the hospital corridor, her heart pounding, not just from the argument with Cassian, but from something far worse. She had lost sight of Lyra. Her daughter had run before she could explain, before she could protect her, but Cassian's words still echoed in her mind. "You knew all along, didn't you? You didn't choose me, Sarah, so why do you think you get to choose Lyra now?" Sarah's fingers curled into tight fists, her emotions a tangled mess. No, she couldn't let this break her right now, not when Lyra was out there, lost and afraid. She was just about to step outside into the hospital garden when, "Dr. Morgan, we need you in the OR, right now." Sarah whipped around to see a nurse rushing toward her, her face pale with urgency. "What happened?" Sarah snapped into doctor mode, pushing everything else aside. "Emily Carter, severe internal bleeding. We need an emergency C-section immediately." Sarah froze. Emily Carter. She knew that name, a 17-year-old girl who had spent months in Sarah's office, struggling with a choice. "I don't know what to do, doctor." "Morgan, I'm only 17. How can I be a mother?" Sarah had sat with her, listened to her fears, and after everything, Emily had chosen to keep the baby, and now she was fighting for both their lives. Sarah exhaled sharply, shoving every personal thought aside. "Prep the OR. I'll be there in 5 minutes." She knew she had to find Lyra, but Emily needed her now. Operating room, blinding surgical lights, the steady beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor, the scent of antiseptic. Sarah was home, BP dropping. "She's losing too much blood. We're running out of time." Sarah pulled on her gloves, her focus razor sharp. "How's the baby?" "Fetal heart rate dropping, 90 BPM. We're losing both mother and child. Not on her watch." Sarah's pulse remained steady as she grabbed the scalpel. The first incision sliced through fragile skin. Her team moved. In sync, everyone knowing that these next moments would determine everything. "We need more suction." Blood pooled where it shouldn't. Time was against them. "We're losing her." Sarah's voice was firm, unyielding. "Increase blood transfusion rate, clamp the artery, stay with me." The seconds dragged into eternity. Then, "Doctor?" "Fetal heart rate is stabilizing," hope sparked in Sarah's chest. "Keep it steady. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. And then, a cry pierced the tension in the room. A new life had entered the world. Sarah let out a breath, her chest tightening with emotion. She had done it. Emily had done it. As the baby's first cries filled the air, a shiver ran down Sarah's spine. Because this moment, this fragile, powerful moment, wasn't just about Emily. It was about herself. She had once been in this same position. She had once held Lyra in her arms for the first time, completely alone. She had chosen to keep her daughter. She had chosen to fight, and she had survived. Emily would survive too. Sarah stepped away from the table, pulling off her gloves. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper, something she had been running from for 10 years. She exhaled and turned toward the door, and froze. Cassian stood just outside the observation window, watching. He had seen everything. The look that changed. Everything. Cassian didn't speak. His gaze wasn't filled with anger anymore. It was something else. Something deeper. For the first time, Cassian didn't see Sarah, the woman he used to love. He saw Sarah, the doctor. Sarah, the mother. Sarah, the strongest person he had ever known. And he couldn't look away. Not because of their history. Not because of love. But because he had never truly seen her until now. He had spent a decade chasing the stars, but she had spent a decade saving lives, and he was suddenly, painfully aware, he had been left behind. Sarah slowly removed her surgical mask. For the first time since their reunion, there was no fury in her eyes, only exhaustion and something else, something even more unsettling. Acceptance. She gave him a single, slow nod. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away. Because there was something more important than Cassian. She still had to find Lyra. Cassian stood motionless in the dimly lit hospital hallway, watching as Sarah's figure disappeared through the door. She didn't say a word. No anger, no accusations, no resentment. Just a single glance. One brief nod that acknowledged his existence, but nothing more. And somehow, that hurt more than any harsh words ever could. He exhaled slowly, leaning against the cold wall. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled his lungs, and with it came an unwanted memory. Boston, 10 years ago. A bitter winter morning. A cramped apartment filled with unspoken tension. Sarah's tear-streaked face as she begged him to stay. And him, turning away. I can't have a family right now, Sarah. I have a bigger purpose. If you keep the baby, I won't be able to give everything I have to the future I'm building. Cassian had said those words with certainty, without hesitation, convinced he was doing the right thing. He had believed that choosing his career over her was the only way forward, but standing here now, watching Sarah walk away, witnessing the life she had built without him. For the first time, Cassian understood the depth of his mistake. Through the glass, he didn't know how long he stood there before his feet moved on their own, carrying him toward the post-operative wing. Through the glass window of a patient room, he spotted Sarah. She sat beside a hospital bed, her fingers wrapped around Emily Carter's fragile hand. Cassian remained still, watching. No one else was in the room. No nurses, no family. Just Sarah. Her posture slightly slumped, exhaustion evident in the curve of her shoulders. She wasn't the sharp, unbreakable doctor right now. She wasn't the woman who had stared him down with unwavering fire. She was just tired. Cassian saw her lips move as she whispered something to Emily. Words of comfort, of strength. He couldn't hear them, but he recognized the gestures. The way she gently brushed the young girl's hair away from her face. The way she remained. Still, a quiet presence, offering stability without needing to say much at all. And then, it hit him. Sarah had sat like this before. Alone, in some cold hospital room after giving birth to Lyra. Without him, without anyone. Cassian's fists clenched at, his sides, his throat tightening. For so many years, he had believed Sarah had left him behind. But the truth was, she was the one who had been left behind. She had faced the pain, the fear, the impossible decisions. Alone. She had built a life, raised a daughter, fought battles he had never even known existed. And through it all, she had never needed him. Cassian had thought he was the one moving forward. But in reality, Sarah had gone farther than he ever could. His fingers curled, nails pressing into his palm as an unfamiliar ache settled in his chest. He had spent the last decade reaching for the stars, chasing a destiny he thought was bigger than anything, but she had spent that same decade saving lives, raising their daughter, becoming something greater than him in every way. And now, he was the one standing in place, watching as she kept moving forward without him. A breath in the dark, Sarah finally rose from the chair, adjusting the blanket over Emily before stepping out of the room. But instead of heading back toward the hospital corridors, she walked past them toward the rear exit of the building. Cassian hesitated, then followed. He stopped just behind the glass door, his gaze locking onto her figure. She stood alone in the dim parking lot, shoulders slightly hunched as she took a long, deep breath, her eyes closed. No walls, no defenses, just Sarah, standing still in the quiet, as if the weight of the entire day was finally crashing down on her. Cassian had never considered this before. He had imagined that in the years apart, Sarah had moved on, maybe built a new family, maybe loved someone else. But the truth was, she had done it alone. She had faced everything alone. And as strong as she was, as unshakable as she seemed, there had to be moments like this. Moments when she just needed a second to breathe. Cassian's fingers curled against the door frame. For the first time, he didn't know what to do. He wanted to step forward. Wanted to say something, anything. But what right did he have to offer her comfort now? She had survived without him for 10 years. Why would she need him now? Cassian exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest growing heavier. He had no idea how to fix this. But for the first time in his life, he desperately wanted to try. Cassian stood frozen in place, watching as Sarah walked away, again. No hesitation, no second-guessing. She was so sure of her choice, and that realization broke him more than he wanted to admit. She had learned to live without him, and now she had no reason to believe he would ever stay. But this time, he wouldn't let her push him away. Cassian took a step forward, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Sarah. She stopped, fingers still gripping the car door handle. But she didn't turn. Cassian's heart pounded. If he didn't say this now, he might never get another chance. I need to talk to you. Slowly, she faced him. Her expression was unreadable. Calm, distant, unshaken. What's left to say? Cassian held her gaze, refusing to back down. I want to make things right with Lyra. The words hung heavy between them. No dodging, no pretending. Sarah blinked. A flicker of something darkened her expression. Make things right, she repeated, her voice laced with quiet disbelief. Cassian nodded. I know I made a mistake. I know I lost 10 years. But I'm here now, and I can't just walk away like nothing happened. Sarah let out a soft laugh, sharp and hollow. Cassian, do you really think you can just decide to be a father now? He opened his mouth, but she didn't let him answer. Do you even know the last time Lyra cried? Cassian frowned slightly, caught off guard by the question. Sarah, She was 5. Sarah cut him off, her voice quieter now, but each word struck like a blade. She came home crying because her classmates asked why she didn't have a father. She cried so hard she had an asthma attack. Cassian stilled, Sarah's fingers clenched into fists. And do you know what happened after that, Cassian? She whispered. He shook his head. She never cried again. A sharp pain pierced his chest. She learned to keep everything to herself. She stopped asking about you. She stopped expecting anyone to pick her up on Father's Day. She grew up knowing that it was just the two of us, and she decided that was enough. Cassian felt like he was suffocating. He had always known his absence had left a wound, but he had never imagined that it had scarred her so deeply. Sarah exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "And now, you want to make things right?" Cassian had no answer, because nothing he said would ever be enough. Sarah took a step closer, her voice softer, not out of anger, but out of something far more painful. "Cassian, you're a brilliant man, but there's one thing you need to understand." She met his eyes, and this time he couldn't look away. "You can't fix a wound by showing up after the scar has already formed." Cassian's throat tightened, because she wasn't saying it to hurt him. She was saying it because she believed it was true, and maybe she was right. His hands curled into fists. He had one chance to walk away, to let her go, but he couldn't. "Not again, Sarah," he said, his voice low, steady. "I'm not saying I can fix this in a day or a month, but I'm not walking away this time." Sarah let out a slow, measured breath. Then she smirked, but there was no amusement in it. "You said that to me once before, 10 years ago." Cassian didn't flinch. "And I was wrong." Sarah stilled. For the first time, Cassian saw something flicker in her eyes, something uncertain. But then, she shook her head. "Cassian, you can't just say you've changed." She stepped back. "You have to prove it." She reached for the car door again. Cassian felt desperate to stop her, to say something that would make her believe him. But before he could, she spoke one last time. "You want to be Lyra's father?" "Fine." Cassian's heart jumped. But fatherhood isn't a decision, Cassian. It's a journey." She looked at him one last time. "And I don't think you have the patience to see it through." Then, she stepped into the car, slamming the door shut. Cassian stood there as she drove away, the night air biting cold against his skin. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one walking away, and for the first time, he had everything to lose. But there was one thing he knew with certainty. He wasn't going to give up, no matter how long it took. Cassian stood motionless in the hospital parking lot, watching Sarah's car disappear into the distance. The wind picked up, but the chill running through him had nothing to do with the autumn air. It was her words. "You want to be Lyra's father? Fine. But you have to accept one thing. Being a father isn't just a decision. It's a journey." Cassian understood that. He knew he couldn't expect forgiveness overnight. But Lyra? Did she hate him? Did she feel betrayed? Knowing that the father she never had was always there, yet had chosen to leave before she was even born. Cassian needed to see her. He couldn't let her live her whole life believing that he had never cared. That night Sarah's apartment, a quiet neighborhood in Houston, Sarah pulled into the driveway and shut off the engine. For a moment, she just sat there, her hands gripping the wheel. Lyra hadn't come home right away after running out of the hospital, but she had texted, saying she just needed some time alone. Sarah knew her daughter. Lyra wasn't reckless. She was smart, logical, but she was still a child growing up with questions that had never had answers. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped inside. The apartment was dark, except for the soft glow seeping from under Lyra's bedroom door. She knocked gently. "Lyra." Silence. Sarah hesitated, then pushed the door open. Lyra was sitting on her bed, clutching her sketchbook against her chest. Her long brown hair fell over her shoulders, her eyes staring straight ahead, focused on nothing at all. Sarah sat down beside her. "Do you want to talk?" Lyra tightened her grip on the sketchbook. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, in a whisper barely audible, "So." He's my father." Sarah's heart clenched. She had wanted to tell Lyra differently, in a way that hurt less. But it was too late for that now. Sarah reached for Lyra's hand, but the girl pulled away. "I don't understand." Lyra's voice wavered. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Sarah closed her eyes for a second, then spoke softly. "I wanted to protect you, Lyra. I didn't want you to grow up with questions I couldn't answer." Lyra bit her lip, her eyes turning glassy. "Didn't want me to grow up with questions," she echoed, voice trembling with anger. "But, Mom, I always had questions." Her hands curled into fists, but still, she didn't let the tears fall. "I always wondered why I didn't have a father. I always wondered if there was something wrong with me." Sarah felt her chest tighten, as if something was crushing the air from her lungs. Lyra took a deep breath, her voice quieter now. "But at least if you had told me sooner, I wouldn't feel like you lied." Sarah had no response. Because she knew, there was nothing she could say to take away the ache in Lyra's voice. After a long silence, Lyra set her sketchbook down on the bed. "Did he not want me?" Her voice was barely more than a breath. Sarah inhaled sharply, forcing herself to stay steady. "Back then, your father chose his career first. And I..." She swallowed. "I chose you." Lyra didn't react at first. She just sat there, hands resting on her knees. Then, slowly, she looked up, her gaze sharper, colder than ever before. "Then why is he back now?" Sarah had no answer, but before she could say anything, another voice spoke from the doorway. "Because I can't leave again." Sarah's head snapped toward the door. Cassian stood there, his gaze locked onto Lyra's. Sarah had locked the apartment, but he hadn't forced his way in. He just stood there, waiting, like he needed permission to take a single step forward. Lyra's fists clenched. She stared at him for a long time, then spoke, her voice sharper, colder than anything Cassian had ever heard in his life. "You are not my father." Cassian felt something inside him shatter, but he didn't look away, didn't plead, didn't try to force his way into something he hadn't earned. He simply said the one thing that mattered. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Lyra. I just hope you'll let me prove that I was wrong to leave, and that I will never leave again." Lyra's lips pressed together, her eyes shimmering, but no tears fell. She didn't say another word. She simply stepped forward and slammed the door in his face. Bam! Cassian closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. He knew this wasn't something he could fix overnight, but even though that door had shut, he wasn't going anywhere, because this wasn't a battle that could be won with words. This was a lifetime of mistakes that had to be rebuilt, piece by piece. And this time, he wasn't running. Cassian stood silently in front of Lyra's door. His hand lifted, hovering just inches from the wood, ready to knock. But then, he hesitated. Behind him, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Sarah. She didn't speak right away. She simply stood there, watching him for a long moment before finally breaking the silence. "Do you think you can fix everything just by showing up?" Her voice wasn't sharp, wasn't accusatory, just brutally honest. Cassian let out a slow breath, lowering his hand. "I don't expect that." Sarah crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe as she studied him carefully. "Then tell me," she said, her tone measured. "What exactly are you planning to do next?" Cassian turned to face her. It was the same question he had been asking himself. The next day, Cassian came back, and the day after that, and the day after that. Even when he was turned away, even when no one invited him in, he still showed up. He waited outside the school every morning, watching as Lyra walked inside without ever looking his way. He sat in the back row of every science competition she competed in, though she pretended not to see him. He sent her messages, brief and simple, never demanding, never expecting, only to be met with silence. Lyra kept her distance like an impenetrable fortress, and Cassian couldn't find a single crack in the wall she had built. But he refused to give up. One late afternoon, Cassian stood outside the school gates as the students filed out. Lyra spotted him instantly. She froze for a split second. Cassian didn't move toward her. He let her make the choice, and instead of taking another route, she walked straight toward him. She said nothing, neither did he. Cassian simply fell into step beside her, keeping his distance. Not too close, but not far enough for her to pretend he wasn't there. When they reached the entrance of her apartment complex, Lyra suddenly stopped. Cassian halted as well. For the first time in days, she looked at him directly. "How long do you plan on doing this?" Her voice was unreadable, emotionless. Cassian took a deep breath. "As long as it takes for you to talk to me." Lyra let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Then you're going to be waiting for a very long time." Cassian didn't flinch. "I can wait." Lyra held his gaze for a second longer, then turned away and walked inside. Cassian stayed where he was, watching as her small frame disappeared beyond the doors. The Houston sky had begun to darken, streaks of amber melting into deep indigo. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but this time, he wasn't giving up, no matter how long it took. Cassian kept showing up for Lyra every day, patiently waiting, even as she refused to let him in. But as the days passed, he found himself fighting not just for his daughter's love. Another battle was closing in. Astrax, the company he had built. With his own hands, the empire he had sacrificed everything for was crumbling. News of major investors pulling out spread like wildfire. Government contracts were put on indefinite hold. Cassian wasn't just losing time with his daughter. He was about to lose the very thing he had once chosen over her. And then, in the midst of it all, Genevieve Langley arrived with an offer he never saw coming. Astrax Headquarters, Houston, Texas. Cassian stormed down the glass-paneled hallway of Astrax's headquarters, the place that had once symbolized his dreams of reaching the stars. Today, it felt suffocating. On the massive LED screens lining the walls, the headlines flashed like warning sirens. Astrax at risk of losing NASA contracts amid financial turmoil. Major investors pull out. The future of Astrax in jeopardy. CEO Cassian Ward on the brink of losing control of his own company. Cassian clenched his jaw, pushing open the doors to the boardroom. Inside, the tension was thick, but at the center of it all, Genevieve Langley sat as if she had no care in the world, stirring her tea with slow, deliberate movements. "Good morning, Cassian," she greeted, smiling like a cat toying with a cornered mouse. Cassian had no patience for games. "There is no good morning here, Genevieve. I need answers. Are you deliberately pulling funding from Astrax?" Genevieve lifted her gaze, arching an elegant brow. "Cassian, you know I'm a businesswoman," she replied, her voice smooth, cutting. "I invest in what has a future, and right now," she tilted her head, her eyes sharp as a blade. "Astrax has no future." Cassian's grip tightened under the table. Genevieve set her cup down, never breaking eye contact. "But," she continued, "I can change that. I can save this company. Cassian's stomach twisted. He knew what was coming. "What's your price?" he asked flatly. Genevieve smiled as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. She leaned forward, locking eyes with him. Then she spoke 3 words that sent a chill down his spine. "Marry me." The room went deathly silent. Cassian stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to tell him this was some twisted joke. But she didn't. Genevieve Langley was ruthless, calculated, and never did anything without reason. She didn't love him. She wanted Asterix, and if he accepted her offer, she would own him too. "You can't be serious." Cassian's voice was low, razor sharp. Genevieve arched a brow. "Oh, I'm very serious." She stood, taking slow, measured steps toward him. "You know the state of Asterix," she murmured, her tone laced with something almost hypnotic. "We've lost nearly half our funding. Government contracts are slipping. And you," she smirked, eyes gleaming, "you've been distracted by a child who just came into your life." Cassian's muscles tensed. Genevieve gave a soft laugh. "Do you really think the board will continue to trust a CEO who isn't fully committed?" Cassian's fists clenched, but he couldn't deny that she had a point. "You have 2 choices, Cassian," Genevieve whispered, circling him like a predator. "You can choose Asterix. Save your company. Protect the dream you've spent your life building." She took another step closer, voice dropping into something silkier, deadlier. "Or you can keep chasing after a child you never even raised." Something inside Cassian snapped. "Don't ever call my daughter a child, like she doesn't matter." His voice was ice, his glare lethal. Genevieve smiled, unfazed. She smoothed a hand over the lapel of his jacket, gaze locked onto his. "Then make your choice, Cassian." She stepped back, eyes glinting with amusement, knowing she had backed him into a corner. Family or career? Cassian felt like the ground beneath him had disappeared. All his life, he had chosen Asterix. He had believed it was his purpose. But now, with Lyra still refusing to speak to him, with Sarah still doubting he could change, with his entire world pulling him in 2 different directions, what the hell was he supposed to do? Cassian couldn't answer. Not yet, but he knew one thing. Whatever choice he made, it would change everything. Cassian stood frozen in the boardroom, Genevieve's words still echoing in his mind. "You have 2 choices, Cassian. Family or career." He had never thought he'd have to choose between the 2, but Genevieve had cornered him, and if he didn't make a decision soon, Asterix would be lost. Cassian clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. He had sacrificed everything for Asterix. He had once believed it was his only purpose, a mission far greater than anything personal. But now, standing at the edge of losing his daughter forever, could he really put Asterix above her again? Genevieve watched him, waiting, and then the door to the boardroom cracked open. A familiar figure stood just outside. Sarah. Cassian's breath caught. She didn't step inside. She simply stood there, frozen, as if someone had just struck her. Her expression was unreadable, but beneath the stillness, he could see it. Pain. Disappointment. A cold dread washed over him. She had heard everything. Sarah didn't know how long she'd been standing there. She had come here to see Cassian, to tell him that Lyra had mentioned him the night before. Not much, not with excitement, but Lyra had started thinking about giving him a chance. And now, Sarah had heard this. Family or career. You could choose Asterix, save the company, protect the dream you've spent your life building. Or you could keep chasing after a child you never even raised. Every word cut into her like a blade, not because Genevieve had said them, but because Cassian hadn't denied them. He hadn't spoken up for Lyra. He hadn't stood his ground for their daughter. So after all these years, he was still the same. Cassian rushed out of the boardroom, but by the time he reached the hallway, Sarah was already walking away. Panic surged in his chest. "Sarah, wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. "What is there left to say, Cassian?" Her voice was terrifyingly calm. Cassian faltered. He could see how much he had hurt her, but he didn't understand why. "Sarah, what did you hear?" He tried to keep his voice steady. Finally, she turned, but the softness he had once known in her eyes was gone. All that was left was quiet devastation. Cassian felt the chill creep through his bones. "You're still the same," Sarah said, her voice sharp as glass. Cassian frowned. "What do you mean?" She let out a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. "I thought, maybe, just maybe, you had really changed." She looked straight into his eyes, searching for something she didn't find. "But no," she whispered, her voice heavy with finality. "You're still Cassian Ward from 10 years ago, a man who never knows how to choose the one thing that actually matters." Cassian felt like she had punched him square in the chest. "Sarah, it's not what you think, isn't it?" She cut him off, her eyes burning with anger now. She took a step closer, her voice low but filled with hurt. "You had a chance to make things right, Cassian. A chance to choose our daughter, and instead, you hesitated." Cassian opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because she was right. The moment Genevieve made her offer, he had hesitated. He hadn't refused her immediately, and that hesitation spoke louder than anything else. Sarah held his gaze, but there was no hope left in her eyes. "It doesn't matter what you say now, Cassian." Her voice cracked, just a little, "because you had a chance to prove you had changed, and you just lost it." She turned and walked away. Cassian wanted to call after her, to explain, to tell her he would never put asterisks before Lyra again. But did it even matter when, deep down, even he wasn't sure if that was true? He could chase after Sarah. He could swear he'd walk away from asterisks, from Genevieve, from everything, just to be with Lyra. But the real question was, would it be a lie? Cassian stood there, motionless, watching Sarah disappear down the hall, and suddenly the world around him fell into a deafening silence. He had lost Sarah once, and now, was he about to lose his daughter too? Cassian had never felt more powerless, and the worst part was, he had no idea what to do next. Cassian stood frozen in the Asterix hallway, watching Sarah's figure disappear down the corridor. A crushing sense of helplessness wrapped around him, suffocating. He wanted to chase after her, to tell her she was wrong, to shout that he had never intended to put asterisks above Lyra. But the truth was, he wasn't sure. His silence in the boardroom, that brief hesitation, those few seconds had been enough to destroy everything. And now, he hadn't just lost Sarah's trust, he might have lost his daughter too. Sarah's apartment. That night Lyra sat still on the couch, staring at the ticking clock on the wall. Each second dragged, stretching unbearably long. The front door swung open. Sarah stepped inside. She looked exhausted, as if she had just walked through a storm. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed, but there were no tears. Lyra felt a sharp ache in her chest. She had never seen her mother look this hurt. Never. Sarah dropped her bag onto the table, taking a slow breath, trying to compose herself. But when she met Lyra's gaze, she knew there was no hiding it. Lyra stood, her voice quiet, but firm. "Did he make you cry again?" Sarah tensed, then shook her head. "No, sweetheart. It's not like that." But Lyra didn't believe her. She stepped closer, her eyes dark with anger. "I'm not a child, Mom." Her voice was cold. "I see everything." Sarah opened her mouth as if to protest, but Lyra cut her off. "You think I don't know? You think I don't see how he keeps showing up, only to disappear again? How he always puts something else before you and me?" Sarah struggled to keep her composure, but her chest felt tight. "Lyra, it's not that simple. Your father, don't call him that." The words lashed out like a whip. Silence crashed over the room. Sarah stared at her daughter, stunned. Lyra bit her lip, her fists clenched. She had never felt this much pain, or this much rage. "My whole life," her voice trembled yet remained unwavering, "I have never had a father." She inhaled sharply as if forcing down the storm raging inside her. "And I don't need him now, either." Sarah's chest tightened. Lyra. But Lyra was already shaking her head. "He's not our family." There was something burning in her eyes, a deep, unshakable pain, a disappointment no words could mend. "You've always protected me from him," she whispered, "so don't let him come back and ruin everything." Sarah didn't know what to say. Lyra had made her decision. She had closed the door. 2 days later, Cassian stood outside Sarah's house, his hands trembling slightly as he knocked on the door. No response. He knocked again. Still nothing. But he knew someone was inside. He knew Lyra was there. A part of him wanted to turn away, to leave, to accept that he had already lost. But he couldn't. He couldn't lose his daughter again. Cassian took a deep breath and stepped back, tilting his head up toward the second-floor window. And then he saw her. Lyra stood behind the curtain, looking down at him. Cassian felt a flicker of hope. He raised his hand slightly, a silent gesture. "I'm here. I'm not leaving." But then, Lyra pulled the curtain shut. Cassian froze. She had seen him, and she had chosen not to open the door. This time, it wasn't Sarah shutting him out. It was his own daughter. Cassian felt the weight of the world crash down on him. He had lost Sarah, and now he had lost Lyra too. Cassian had lost everything. Sarah, Lyra, and now, possibly Asterix. Could he still fix the mistakes of his past, or had he lost his family forever? Do you think Lyra should forgive Cassian? If you were in her shoes, what would you do? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and share your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next emotional chapter of this journey. Cassian's fight isn't over yet. Let's see if he can win back his daughter's heart. Cassian still stood outside Sarah's door, his gaze locked onto the window where Lyra had just pulled the curtain shut. Her silence cut deeper than any words. She didn't yell. She didn't push him away. She simply turned her back, and that hurt the most. For the first time in his life, Cassian felt completely lost, not because he didn't know how to fight, but because he wasn't sure if this battle even mattered anymore, if the one person he was fighting for had already given up on him. But no matter how many times he was shut out, he couldn't walk away. He wouldn't, and to keep going, he had to make the most important decision of his life. Asterix headquarters. Cassian's office. Cassian stepped into his office for what could be the last time. No one knew yet. No one knew that this might be the day he walked away from everything he had built. He approached his desk, letting his fingers run over the surface. The blueprints of spacecrafts, the research notes on quantum propulsion, the dreams of reaching Mars. 10 years ago, this was his world. But now, as he looked at it all, he wasn't so sure anymore. The door swung open. Genevieve Langley. She was as poised as ever, a designer dress hugging her figure, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. But today, the usual seductive charm in her eyes was gone, replaced by cold, calculating challenge. "Have you made up your mind?" Genevieve asked, her voice smooth as silk. Cassian didn't answer right away. He simply looked at her, the woman who could save Asterix, who could secure everything he had spent a lifetime building. But in exchange, he would lose the last chance to fix things with his daughter. He took a deep breath and spoke slowly. "No." Genevieve stilled, her brows lifted, disbelief flashing in her eyes. "No?" Cassian nodded. "I refuse." She laughed, a soft, dangerous sound. "Cassian, do you even realize what you're doing?" His eyes didn't waver. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Another breath. Then, with complete certainty, he said, "I'd rather lose Asterix than lose my daughter again." Silence. Genevieve's smile vanished. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, sharp as a knife. "So, what's your plan, Cassian?" "Walk away from the company you built from nothing. Watch it crumble before your eyes for a child who doesn't even want you in her life?" Cassian clenched his fists but held his ground. "Lyra might not need me now," he said, his voice steady, "but I refuse to let her grow up believing I never tried." Genevieve exhaled sharply, her control slipping just a little. "You're disappointing, Cassian." Cassian only smiled. "I don't care." He turned, pulled open his desk drawer, and retrieved a thick envelope. He placed it on the desk between them. "This is my resignation." Genevieve froze. She stared at the envelope like it was something impossible, something inconceivable. Cassian met her eyes. "I know you have enough shares to put anyone you want in the CEO's chair, and I know Asterix isn't mine anymore. So instead of waiting for you to push me out, I'm leaving on my own terms." Genevieve's nails dug into her palm, then, just as quickly, she smoothed her expression. She picked up the envelope, weighing it in her hands. When she looked up again, her smile had returned, this time laced with something lethal. "Did you really think it would be this easy, Cassian?" Cassian knew Genevieve Langley well enough. She never accepted defeat, and he had just made her his greatest enemy. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid, because now he knew exactly what he wanted. "No," he said, his voice unwavering, "but I'm ready for whatever comes next." Genevieve smirked, then slowly tucked his resignation letter into her bag. "Then buckle up, Cassian. Let's see how long you last." She turned and walked away, her heels echoing down the hall. Cassian watched her go, his expression unreadable. Asterix had been his entire world for so many years. He had poured his soul into it. And now he had given it all up. For Lyra. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Then, without looking back, Cassian Ward walked out of Asterix. For the first time in years, he left without hesitation. And he didn't look back. Cassian stepped out of Asterix headquarters, feeling both relieved and empty. For the first time in over a decade, he no longer belonged here. He had chosen his daughter. He had been willing to sacrifice everything to make things right. But what he didn't realize was that the real nightmare was only just beginning. Somewhere in the city, Genevieve Langley was making a move that could destroy him completely. Genevieve's penthouse, downtown Houston. Genevieve stood on the balcony of the tallest skyscraper in the city, a glass of wine in her hand, swirling it slowly. Below her, Houston glowed with thousands of city lights, but in her mind, there was only one image: Cassian Ward. He had dared to reject her, dared to walk away on his own terms instead of kneeling at her feet. That was unacceptable. Genevieve Langley was not the kind of woman who took defeat lightly. She didn't just want Cassian to lose Asterix. She wanted to destroy his entire reputation, his entire life. Her phone buzzed. A cold voice spoke on the other end. "We have the information you asked for." Genevieve's lips curled into a slow, venomous smile. Good. She set down her wine glass and walked back inside. Let the world see the real Cassian Ward. The next morning, Cassian sat in a cafe near Sarah's apartment waiting for any chance to see Lyra. His phone kept vibrating. At first, he ignored it. But then, a message from Mark, his former assistant at Asterix, made his blood run cold. "Mark, Cassian, turn on the news." Now, Cassian frowned, quickly pulling up a news app, and just like that, his entire world collapsed. Breaking news. Cassian. Ward accused of fraud. Allegedly manipulated Asterix funding evidence leaked. Did the former CEO cover up financial losses to stay in power? Cassian Ward. Genius or con artist? Cassian's grip tightened around his phone. This wasn't real. The media was flooded with articles accusing him of corruption, using leaked internal documents to paint a false picture of him. Cassian never manipulated Asterix's finances. He never deceived anyone. But Genevieve had orchestrated this perfectly. And she had done it too well. His phone kept buzzing. "Mark, we're trying to control the damage, but it's bad, Cass. They're pushing for an official investigation." Former colleague. "I don't think you'd ever do this, but the press is relentless. Do you need help?" Unknown number. "Mr. Ward, this is the Houston Police Department. We need you to come in for questioning." A cold sweat broke across Cassian's forehead. He shot up from his seat, threw some cash on the table, and stormed out of the cafe. He needed to stop this. He needed to find Genevieve. But the second he stepped onto the sidewalk, a blinding storm of camera flashes exploded in his face. The press had found him. "Cassian, what do you say about the fraud allegations? Did you misuse Asterix funds for personal gain? Can you explain the leaked documents?" Cassian was trapped. The crowd of reporters swarmed him, microphones and cameras shoved into his face. The questions came at him like a relentless barrage of bullets, leaving no room to breathe. But he knew. One wrong answer could bury him forever. Sarah's apartment. Second-floor window Lyra stood behind the curtains watching the scene unfold below. Her mother stood beside her, silently gripping a cup of coffee. Both of them watched Cassian, caught in the merciless grip of the media storm. Sarah said nothing. Lyra said nothing, but something inside the girl shifted. Something that felt eerily like disappointment. Cassian had told her he would put family first, that he would fight for her, not for his career. And yet, here he was, in the middle of a scandal, dragging chaos back into their lives once more. Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line. Silently, She turned away and walked to her bedroom. She closed the door. Sarah let out a quiet sigh. She didn't say anything because deep down, she knew, this time, Cassian might have truly lost his last chance. Cassian sat in his temporary apartment, the glow from his computer screen casting sharp shadows on his face. The scandal was everywhere. Every major news outlet, every screen, every image of him, surrounded by reporters, broadcasted on repeat. He had lost Asterix, lost his name, and, most importantly, he had probably lost his daughter. Cassian ran a hand over his face, exhaustion clawing at every inch of him. But despite everything, there was still one thing he couldn't let go of. Lyra. Even if she pushed him away, even if she believed he had failed her, he couldn't stop caring, and that was why he was here, staring at the schedule for an outdoor science event Lyra's school was attending. He knew he shouldn't go. He knew showing up might make things worse, but his heart wouldn't let him stay away. Cassian exhaled heavily and shut the screen, even if it was just from afar, even if it was just for a fleeting moment. He had to see her. He had nothing left to lose. But he could still choose how he kept trying. That evening, the Texas sky stretched wide and endless, a perfect night for stargazing. Lyra stood with her classmates in an open field where massive telescopes had been set up for observation. The students were buzzing with excitement, jotting down notes in their journals as they gazed up at the stars. Lyra did the same, but her mind was elsewhere. For days, her mother had avoided mentioning Cassian, but Lyra knew she was worried. Cassian was on every news channel, accused of things she didn't fully understand. But what she did understand was this: her father was in trouble, and what frustrated her the most wasn't what he had done or hadn't done. It was the fact that, no matter how hard she tried to erase him from her life, he still mattered to her. Lyra exhaled, tilting her head back to stare at the vast sky. Here, in the infinite expanse of the universe, she could breathe. Here, she didn't have to think about him. But then, she turned and froze. A familiar figure stood just beyond the event's perimeter, watching in silence. Cassian Ward. Lyra's breath hitched. It couldn't be. Her chest tightened as she locked eyes with him from across the distance. Cassian hadn't meant for this to happen. He had stayed back, out of sight, far enough that no one would notice. He wasn't here to interfere. He just needed to see her. But then, their eyes met, and time seemed to stop. Cassian saw the hesitation in her gaze, but worse than that, he saw the hurt, and Lyra. She didn't know what she felt. She had told herself she didn't want to see him. Yet now that he was here, standing still, saying nothing, making no excuses, she didn't know what to do. Slowly, Lyra turned away. She walked faster toward her classmates. Cassian didn't follow. He had no right to. He could only stand there, watching his daughter disappear into the crowd, wondering if she would ever forgive him. Back with her friends, Lyra tried to focus on the stars again, but she couldn't, because Cassian was still there. And the worst part? He wasn't chasing after her, wasn't trying to talk to her, wasn't fighting for her the way he had sworn he would. Wasn't that what he always said? That he wouldn't give up? That he wouldn't walk away? So why was he just standing there? A flicker of irritation sparked in Lyra's chest, but beneath that, buried so deep she barely recognized it, there was something else, something she wasn't ready to name. Her fingers clenched around her notebook. Then, after a glance at her teacher, Lyra quietly stepped away from the group. She moved toward the edge of the field. Cassian hadn't moved. He was still watching. Lyra didn't stop. She didn't look directly at him. But as she passed by, she muttered something barely louder than a breath. "Mom said, you always put your career first." A pause. "So why are you here?" Cassian didn't get a chance to answer. Lyra was already walking away, but his heart clenched at the words. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close. But it was something. A sign that maybe, just maybe, she was still thinking about him. And if she was thinking about him, then maybe there was still a way back into her life. Lyra returned to her group, but her mind was anything but calm. The question she had left for Cassian lingered in her head. She wasn't even sure if she wanted an answer. She had spent so long convincing herself that Cassian didn't matter, that he wasn't her family. But seeing him standing there, silent, unmoving, making no attempt to force a conversation, something felt off. Was he actually trying? Lyra shook her head, forcing herself to focus on the instructor's lecture. Around her, students were eagerly watching the demonstration, an experiment with a miniature spacecraft module designed to simulate how a station docks in orbit. The module hovered using small thrusters, its LED lights blinking rhythmically. A technician stepped forward, speaking into a microphone. "This is a scaled-down prototype of our autonomous landing system. It's programmed to adjust its trajectory, but if there's a malfunction, we can manually override it from here." Static crackled through the speakers. The control panel flickered. One of the engineers stiffened, his fingers flying over the controls. "What's happening?" a colleague asked urgently. "I don't know. There's an unexpected power surge. The thrusters are overloading." From a distance, Cassian saw the tension in their movements. He had been in the aerospace industry long enough to recognize a problem before it spiraled out of control. And right now, something was very, very wrong. Cassian took a step forward, just as the module lurched violently. Alarms shrieked. The engineers scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. One of the thrusters erupted in sparks, sending the module into a wild, spinning descent, and then it veered straight toward the students, straight toward Lyra. Everything happened in a single heartbeat. Screams erupted. Students scattered. Teachers and engineers shouted over one another, desperately trying to stop the module's trajectory. But Lyra didn't move. She stood frozen as the spacecraft hurtled toward her. It wasn't huge, but at this speed, the impact could be devastating. She knew she had to run, but her body wouldn't react. And then, a blur of movement, a shadow racing toward her, Cassian. He didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't care about the danger. He only knew one thing: his daughter was in harm's way. Cassian threw himself forward, slamming into Lyra, shoving her out of the way with all his strength. They tumbled onto the grass, rolling from the impact, and a split second later, boom! The module crashed exactly where Lyra had been standing. Sparks exploded, flames licking at the metal wreckage. A jagged shard of debris flew outward, slicing through the air, straight into Cassian's shoulder. Pain tore through him, white-hot and blinding. Cassian gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay upright. But none of that mattered. Lyra. He turned, heart hammering. "Lyra! Are you hurt?" Lyra gasped for breath, eyes wide in shock. She was alive. Cassian nearly collapsed with relief. But then, she saw the blood, deep red, seeping through his sleeve. "You're hurt!" Lyra's voice was raw, rising in panic. Cassian exhaled a shaky laugh, despite the searing pain. "It's nothing," he murmured. "All that matters is that you're safe." Lyra couldn't breathe. The man she had spent years pushing away, the man she had sworn she didn't need, had just risked everything to save her. Not because he had to, not because anyone told him to, but because he was her father. For the first time, Lyra saw him not as a stranger, not as a man who had abandoned her, but as a man who had chosen her. Cassian attempted to stand, but the pain in his shoulder made him stagger. Without thinking, Lyra reached out, her small hands gripping his arm, steadying him. They both froze. Cassian looked down at where she was holding onto him. Lyra looked up, conflicted emotions swirling in her eyes. She could have walked away, could have let him handle it on his own, could have continued pretending she didn't care. But this time, she didn't let go, and Cassian knew. Everything had changed. Lyra still held on to Cassian's hand, but she could feel the faint tremor in his fingers. Blood from his shoulder wound continued to seep through his shirt, the deep red spreading across the fabric. Cassian tried to keep his expression calm, but Lyra saw it. The way his jaw tightened, the way his breaths grew heavier. Engineers and teachers rushed toward them, voices shouting, footsteps pounding against the ground. But none of it mattered. At this moment in her world, there was only him, and for the first time in her life, Lyra was afraid of losing him. She had spent years convincing herself that Cassian meant nothing, that she didn't need him, that he wasn't her family, that he was just a man who had abandoned her before she was even born. But right now, all of those thoughts vanished. "You're hurt!" Lyra's voice came out sharper, more frantic than she expected. Cassian attempted a reassuring smile, but it wavered beneath the pain. "It's just a scratch, kiddo." His voice was weaker than usual. Lyra didn't believe him. A lump formed in her throat, a tight, suffocating feeling that made it hard to breathe. Everything around her blurred. All she could see was Cassian, struggling to stay upright, his shirt darkening with blood. Lyra wasn't afraid of danger. She wasn't afraid of the module that had almost killed her. She was afraid that if she turned away now, Cassian might disappear forever. And this time, she wasn't sure she could handle that. Medics rushed in. One of them tried to move Lyra aside to assess Cassian's injuries, but Lyra didn't let go. "Step back, sweetheart. We need space to—" "No!" Her voice cut through the chaos. Everyone froze. Lyra turned, her eyes fierce, unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere." Her voice shook, but it wasn't weak. "I'm staying. With him." Cassian's eyes widened, disbelief flickering through the pain. A warmth spread through his chest, overpowering the throbbing in his shoulder. Lyra had chosen to stay. No one forced her. No one told her she had to. It was her decision, and to Cassian, that meant more than anything in the world. The ambulance arrived. Medics swiftly dressed Cassian's wound, stabilizing him before moving him onto the stretcher. As they lifted him, Cassian's gaze instinctively searched for her. Lyra was still there. She hadn't gone back to her classmates. She hadn't run away. She was still here. A nurse bent down, her voice gentle. "Do you want to ride with him, sweetheart?" Lyra didn't hesitate. Not for a single second. Yes. Cassian felt his throat tighten. He couldn't remember the last time someone had chosen to stay by his side, and now, that someone was his daughter. The ambulance sped through the Texas night, lights flashing, siren wailing. Cassian lay on the stretcher, the bandage on his shoulder already soaking through. The pain dulled, not from the medication, but because Lyra was beside him. She sat close, clutching her sketchbook against her chest, her small hands gripping it tightly, as if grounding herself in this whirlwind of chaos. Cassian watched her, his voice hoarse. "You don't have to come with me, you know." Lyra frowned, looking at him like he had just said something completely idiotic. "Do you really think I'd leave?" Cassian blinked. He hadn't expected that. Lyra lowered her gaze, her voice quieter now. "I don't know how I feel about you." A pause. Then she looked up again, and for the first time, Cassian saw it. A glimmer of something unfamiliar in her eyes, a flicker of acceptance. "But I know one thing." She took a breath. "I don't want to lose you." Cassian felt something inside him break wide open, not because it was a grand declaration, not because she had forgiven him, but because for the first time, Lyra saw him as her father. Maybe she wasn't ready to let go of the past. Maybe she was still angry, but she had chosen to stay, and to Cassian. That was the only thing that mattered. Cassian had sacrificed everything, his career, his reputation, even his own safety, just to protect his daughter. And in the end, Lyra had faltered just for a moment. A single moment of hesitation, a crack in the walls she had built around herself. A turning point. The first step toward something neither of them knew how to name. But was it enough? Was it enough to bring Cassian back into her life? Was it enough for Sarah to finally believe that he had changed? What do you think of Cassian's choice? If you were Lyra, would you be able to forgive him? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the final chapter, where past, present, and future collide, and Cassian must face the ultimate question. Does he truly deserve a second chance? Sarah stood outside the emergency room, her eyes fixed on the figure lying on the hospital bed through the glass doors. Inside, Cassian lay still, his face pale from blood loss, yet he managed a faint smile as the doctor checked his wound. His shoulder was tightly bandaged. The injury wasn't critical, but it would leave him in pain for days to come. But it wasn't Cassian who held Sarah's attention. It was Lyra. She sat at the very edge of the bed, her small hand still clutching Cassian's, even though no one had asked her to. She hadn't left. She wasn't keeping her distance like before. She wasn't avoiding him as she always had whenever the topic of her father came up. Sarah couldn't believe what she was seeing. Lyra had rejected Cassian. She had seen him as nothing more than a stranger. But now, her daughter was sitting beside him, holding on, refusing to let go. Sarah watched the way Lyra bit her lip, the worry in her eyes every time the doctor touched Cassian's wound. She saw how Lyra's grip on Cassian's hand tightened whenever he so much as winced in pain. And for the first time in 10 years, Sarah realized Cassian had truly changed. She didn't walk in right away. She stood there for a long time, observing Cassian from afar, making sure that what she was seeing wasn't just some illusion. He was different now. He was no longer the man who only cared about work, who once put his career above everything else, who had once treated emotions as an afterthought. The man before her was willing to sacrifice everything to protect their daughter, and more than anything, he wasn't doing it to prove something to her. Cassian hadn't known she was standing here. He hadn't known she had seen him throw himself in front of Lyra, risking everything without hesitation. He hadn't done it to win Sarah back. He had done it for one simple reason, because he was Lyra's father. And for the first time, Sarah no longer saw Cassian as the man who had hurt her. She saw him as a father. Inside, Lyra still sat beside Cassian, but her eyelids were growing heavy with exhaustion. Sarah watched as her daughter rubbed her eyes, then slowly leaned against the bed and, without meaning to, drifted off to sleep right beside Cassian. Cassian hadn't fallen asleep yet. He shifted slightly, his face weary but soft as he looked at Lyra beside him. Slowly, carefully, he lifted his uninjured hand and rested it gently on her hair. A quiet touch, a silent protection. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. For a long time, she had believed that Cassian didn't deserve to be Lyra's father, that he would never be able to put his family above his career. But the man before her now was no longer the Cassian from 10 years ago. He had lost everything. But maybe, just maybe, he had finally found the one thing that truly mattered. Sarah took a slow breath, then stepped into the hospital room. Cassian turned his head, surprise flickering in his eyes as she walked toward him. She didn't say anything at first. She simply looked at him, as if searching for confirmation that the man before her was real. At last, she spoke, her voice quiet but no longer cold. "Are you okay?" Cassian blinked, then let out a faint, tired smile. "I will be." A long silence stretched between them. But this time, it wasn't the silence of resentment or distance. It was the silence of two people who had hurt each other too deeply, but were slowly finding their way back. Sarah looked down at Lyra, still peacefully asleep beside Cassian. She let out a soft sigh, then pulled up a chair and sat down, right across from Cassian. She didn't walk away. She didn't avoid him anymore, and Cassian knew she was starting to see him differently. Cassian glanced at Sarah as she quietly took a seat beside his hospital bed. There was no tension this time. No accusations, just a soft silence. A small yet undeniable sign that she was beginning to see him in a different light. Lyra still slept, soundly beside him, her small hand unconsciously holding on to his. Cassian felt something stir deep within him, something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. He had once believed that peace could only be found in reaching for the stars, but now, he realized, it was this. Sarah took a slow breath before speaking. "What are you going to do next?" Cassian met her gaze. He didn't need to ask what she meant, because he had been asking himself the same thing. He had lost Astrax, lost the career he had spent his entire life building. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid of that loss. He knew exactly what he needed to do next. He no longer wanted to build an empire in space just to leave behind a legacy. He wanted to create something meaningful. Cassian looked down at Lyra, then back at Sarah. A quiet, knowing smile formed on his lips, his eyes filled with a certainty he had never possessed before. "I'm going to start over." 3 months later, Cassian stood in the middle of an old warehouse, the first headquarters of his new project. No more towering glass buildings, no more grand media conferences, just a modest workshop, a handful of loyal colleagues, and an idea that he truly believed could change the world. Not for profit, not for the commercialization of space, but for the people who needed it most. Cassian ran his hand over the model in front of him, a design he had spent the last 3 months refining, a space station system capable of recycling air and water, intended for disaster-stricken areas and remote communities on Earth. A dream no longer meant for wealth and prestige, but for survival and hope. Mark, his former assistant, the only one who hadn't abandoned him after the scandal, walked in, holding a tablet. "We have our first investor," Mark announced, excitement in his voice. Cassian lifted a brow. Really? Mark nodded. Not a major corporation, but a non-profit organization. They want to partner with us to develop this project for areas impacted by climate change. Cassian let out a quiet laugh. Once, he might have been disappointed if the investors weren't industry giants. But now, he realized this was the right path. No more chasing fame, no more fighting for power. Just Cassian Ward, a man who wanted to do something that mattered. That afternoon, Cassian returned to the workshop. His new world. He hadn't expected a visitor. Lyra stood at the entrance, clutching her sketchbook tightly to her chest. Cassian was surprised, but didn't move toward her too quickly. He was afraid that if he took one wrong step, she would retreat again. But this time, Lyra didn't run. She looked around, her gaze curious but no longer distant. "What is this?" she asked, pointing at the blueprint on his work table. Cassian smiled softly, stepping beside the design. A humanitarian space station. It can provide clean water and air to the people who need it the most. Lyra frowned, thinking. So, it's not for the rich or big companies? Cassian shook his head. No, it's for the ones I never thought about before. Lyra didn't respond right away. She stared at the blueprint, then at Cassian. Then, slowly, she flipped open her sketchbook. She turned to a fresh page, and then she held it out to him. Cassian looked down. It was a drawing, a sketch of the very system he was designing, but with a few modifications. Cassian froze. He lifted his head, locking eyes with his daughter. Lyra shrugged, trying to sound casual. "You got some things wrong," she said. "The structure isn't optimized for pressure in space." Cassian couldn't believe what he was hearing. He looked at the drawing, then back at her. A slow smile spread across his face. "Oh, really?" he asked lightly. Lyra held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. Cassian's heart pounded in his chest. She hadn't said she forgave him. She hadn't called him Dad, but she had stepped into his world, and Cassian knew this was a new beginning. Cassian held Lyra's drawing in his hands, studying the sharp lines, the precise calculations, more accurate than his own design. She remained standing there, silent, but Cassian knew this wasn't just a design, it was a sign. A door, slightly open, a chance to step into her life, not as a stranger, not as the father who had once left, but as the father she could finally trust. He lifted his gaze, his eyes filled with emotions he couldn't hide. "I got a few things wrong, didn't I?" His voice was light as the wind. Lyra shrugged, feigning indifference. But Cassian saw the struggle in her eyes, a battle between the past and the present, between pain and hope. Finally, she spoke, just one simple sentence. "If you want to get it right, I can help." Cassian couldn't believe his ears. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door, and this time, he wouldn't let it close. That day, Lyra spent nearly 2 hours sitting with Cassian, debating the design. No more cold distance. No more silence filled with hurt. Just a child who loved. Science and a man who had lost everything, now trying to rebuild it all. Later. That evening, Sarah arrived later than usual to pick Lyra up. As she stepped inside, she saw something she never thought she'd witness. Cassian and Lyra sat side by side, heads bent over the blueprint, Cassian pointing to a detail while Lyra frowned, explaining why his calculations were flawed. No hesitation, no forced interaction, just a strange sense of ease. Sarah stood in the doorway watching as a rush of emotions flooded through her. For 10 years, she had believed that Cassian couldn't change. But now, here he was. Not just a man consumed by his work. He was a father. Sarah took a deep breath and finally spoke. "Lyra, are you ready to go?" Lyra blinked, as if suddenly remembering her mother was there. She glanced at Cassian, hesitating. Cassian was prepared for her to walk away. But this time, Lyra didn't leave immediately. She hesitated. Sarah saw it, and Cassian did too. Cassian stood, saying nothing. He didn't want to push her, didn't want her to feel pressured. He simply waited. Lyra looked at him, her gaze a galaxy of contradictions. And then, slowly, cautiously, she reached out. Cassian froze. Lyra took his hand, not because she had to, not because anyone told her to, but because she wanted to. Cassian felt his heart shatter and rebuild all at once. But he didn't say a word. Didn't want to break this moment. Lyra took a deep breath, then quietly spoke the words that erased everything else around him. "Mom, wait a minute." She squeezed his hand tighter. Then, looking directly into his eyes, for the first time in her life, she called him Dad. Cassian stood utterly still. For 10 years he had imagined this moment, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of it. It hurt in the best way. It was beautiful beyond words. He took a shaky breath, feeling his eyes burn, but he kept smiling. He wouldn't cry. Not now. He just wanted to hold on to this moment for as long as possible. After a few seconds, Lyra let go of his hand. She turned to her mother. "Now I'm ready to go." Sarah didn't say anything. She just looked at her daughter. Then she turned to Cassian. Their eyes met. No promises, no declarations about the future. Just understanding. Sarah knew now. Cassian had changed. Cassian knew. Sarah still needed time, and they both knew. This journey was far from over. But at least they had taken the first step. Sarah gave Cassian a small nod before taking Lyra's hand. Cassian stood still, watching them walk away. No more loss. No more despair, just hope, and for Cassian Ward, that was enough. Cassian Ward was once a man driven by ambition, believing that success was the only thing that mattered. But the price of his past mistakes was steep, losing his family, losing his daughter, and losing his chance to be loved. He had given up everything. To chase a dream among the stars, only to realize too late that he had lost the most important ones in his life, Sira and Lyra. Yet, what makes this story special is not the loss itself, but the journey to reclaim what was lost. Cassian learned that being a father isn't defined by simply being there from the beginning. It's about refusing to walk away, even after making mistakes. He didn't fight for redemption, expecting immediate forgiveness. He fought because his daughter deserved a father who would never stop trying, no matter how many times she pushed him away. Sarah, too, learned to let go of the past. She no longer saw Cassian as the man who had hurt her, but as a father trying with everything he had to make things right. And Lyra, the girl who spent her whole life believing she didn't need a father, finally realized that love isn't something so easily denied. They had all suffered loss, but because of that, they found what truly mattered. Sometimes we have to lose everything to understand what's truly important. Cassian lost Asterix, lost his reputation, lost the image of the man he once thought he needed to be. But in return, he found something far greater. A family he never knew he needed this much. Because in the end, the most important stars aren't the ones in the sky, they're the ones we hold in our hearts. E. Thank you for being a part of this journey until the very last moment. What are your thoughts on Cassian's redemption? Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you love emotional, heartfelt stories full of depth and meaning, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. Once again, thank you, and see you in the stories to come.